All right. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening from where everybody's coming in from. Welcome to another one of the WISER series webinars. We are going to be having a rather intriguing conversation about the what happens if, or actually even more than just what happens if, when you get your ass handed to you and when something occurs and that wonderful, unfortunate red screen of death or whatever happens, i.e. the ransomware. So rather interesting conversation we've been having behind the scenes for the last 10 or 15 minutes about all of this stuff that's going on in the world. And hopefully we're going to spend the next hour or so having the conversation in front. So at this point, I am going to shut the hell up. And I'm actually going to let everybody introduce themselves. And let's start ladies first. Jill, Dale, please, if you wouldn't mind. You're on mute.
No audio.
Oh, there you go.
Sorry. Hello, everybody. I'm really excited to be here with these guys. I am a new to cyber person, and I really don't have a lot to share. I've been listening to these guys for the last few minutes, and I am intrigued, and I can't wait to get the conversation started. So.
Well, I'm going to inject on this one because you've got an amazing amount to share on controls and policy and just everything that's not our crazy world. So I'm going to bust you up because you've got a ton to share on that side of the world. So be nice to you. All right. Let us go. We got to go beard length next. I'm sorry. Matt, you're up.
I appreciate it, Chris. I think that might be a little biased, but
Little.
So I'm actually the Director of Technology and Security for a managed services provider. We manage about 15,000 humans across 5 states and their day-to-day lives for the SMB market. So anywhere between 50 and 200 user space, traditionally under 10 or 15 million in revenue or so traditionally. But that's my job is to look at what the trends are and try to drive our technology delivery and how we help solve some of the things that Chris speaks about and WISER preaches about so often is the preparedness and how do we do things and the muscle and feel of these things so clients have a little more operational maturity level around their environments and responding to incidents. So
awesome, thank you. Dennis, you're up, sir.
Hey, thanks for having me on. So I took a little bit different angle than I guess some of the folks that are really busy doing IR for ransomware attacks. I took my team and I and sat down and said, you know what, we're smart people. We know about encryption and cryptography and how to analyze all of that. Let's see if we can develop some technology to make it so that nobody has to pay a ransom if they have our stuff installed. So that was the goal. A year later, and a little bit of cussing internally, I think we have a pretty good product in the market, and I'm excited to hear some of the in the trenches stories from some other folks as well.
Nice. Curtis, looking forward to these conversations as well. Go for it, sir. You're up.
Hey, and for the record, I can grow a pretty epic beard. It's all white, but it's epic. I promise. Yeah, so I'm the CEO of GroupSense. We're a cyber reconnaissance and digital risk company. Basically, what that means is we spy on hackers all day long. We infiltrate their chat rooms.
threat actors, I think you meant to say.
Threat actors. Sorry, to my hacker friends. I know. Yeah, so we're in their chat rooms. We're communicating with them on a daily basis, and that has led to us being involved in the aftermath of a lot of ransomware incidents in the last couple of years, and specifically getting pulled into somewhat kicking and screaming initially the actual negotiations related to those incidents. And we're doing quite a few a week now, and they range from small to medium businesses all the way to very large, well-known NASDAQ traded, public-facing large businesses. So we're right in the trenches talking to the bad guys on an almost daily basis.
Yeah, I'm actually kind of looking forward to that side of it because I think a number of us engage with and are part of some of those orgs for a variety of different reasons. So it'll be interesting to see that perception versus obviously some of the other stuff that we pull in from like the Intel side and various other side of things. All right, so we've got the questions for everybody for the most part are sitting out on the WISER website. We've got the ransomware side. I'm going to ask the difficult one first. I kind of can't. I think we already know the answer given the amount of news stories. You come in the morning, your systems are all locked down. You've got a nice little note on them from whatever adversary from whatever country. found your open, we've got to use TeamViewer, haven't we, given some of the latest news, found your open TeamViewer site, do you pay? I mean, let's first and foremost, do you have to sit there and go, okay, we've got to pay on this? And I'm gonna throw this at Curtis for a second, because I mean, between you and Matt, you've got the most of this. Del, I'm gonna hit a lot more stuff on the other things, but Curtis, give me some thoughts on this.
Well, ultimately, the decision on whether to pay a ransom or not is a business decision. It's completely subjective to the organization. Some organizations can recover, relatively cheaply, but that is a general ledger question, really. Like, can we afford to be down while we recover, or can we? Is there an ROI on us just paying this and getting it done? The one thing I want to say though is, and Dennis, I'd love to talk to you about this offline, because what you don't want to do is go to Google and just say, how do I get out? How do I get out of this ransomware situation?
Yeah, no.
Because the first 5 responses you get are people who are going to exploit your situation to their benefit. They're scammers. And we run into companies all the time that panic, Google, help me, I've got ransomware, and they get help that costs them a lot more money than the ransom itself.
Well, this is interesting, and this comes to the side that Dell, I mean, this is really from Dell, from like procedural controls, everything that should be done leading up to that ransomware side of things. So I'm kind of interested on that one, because I mean, we've been preaching it for more years than I care to think of, is be prepared, be aware, be ready. And so, Dell, give me some thoughts on this one. It's like, why are we still seeing so many flipping companies? What is going on out there? Why aren't people listening? I mean, what the heck is going on with these people, for crying out loud?
I believe, in my honest opinion, that they don't want to pay for the awareness training and the awareness programs. I think if you start from that level, the people that work in your company and the different things that go around that, your clients, once you start teaching them some type of awareness, you might be able to get those metrics down, and keep some people out. But there's also other stuff that they can do as far as having recovery plans in place, so when you do get hit with that, do you have a cloud backup? Do you have an on-site and an off-site spot where you keep your backups? Those are just my little, side tidbits.
That's huge. And this is, I mean, Curtis, this kind of goes to your thing from the business standpoint. It's like, oh, well, I actually just ran into one fairly recently. They got their ass handed to them, and their attitude was, we can recover. They had completely cold storage offsite backups. So they blew everything away.
They're in the minority, but perfect.
Oh my gosh, are they ever? Yeah. And I think this, Matt, Matt, give me some thoughts, because I mean, to Curtis's point, I mean, they seem to be in the minority, and we end up going in more from not going, hey, give me your logs, and they're like, oh, we really wish we had some of those.
Yeah, well, like if you had a pie chart, if you're honest, right, and that pie chart was the people that were prepared, you're right, it's a very tiny slice, but it doesn't stop there, right? Because the preparedness is only how far you zoom in. And by that, I mean, yes, the basics still 100%, like you should have backups, you should have them on site, you should have tested them, you should know that they're else, like those things should exist. But ransomware after December of 2020 or so kind of took a big turn, and there's egression aspects. There's things that now are extortionable things that even if the ransomware stopped, Dennis, to your point, I still might have that data floating. And if I don't have the appropriate controls to be able to prove the absence of that data as egression, then I now have different things about whether I pay and what that means. And then it comes into, making sure you hire a reputable firm to do that research and say, if I pay these people, will they still dox me? Will I still have this situation of this event, or will I have the ability to control it? And is it on OFAC lists? Which brings it back to why I don't negotiate with ransomware, is I'm not checking OFAC in that way, and that's not my space. And Chris, getting a little tangential, but ultimately at the core of this, if you don't have a plan with the appropriate crisis comms, the appropriate things of what you're going to do from a legal, the lines in the sand of whether you call insurance and how you approach that and what your next steps are, and the belief that the basics that Del brought up are done. The belief and knowledge and just empirical understanding that they're done. But that's why we exist, is to try to scale that, right? And help do that in a better and more effective way for more and more humans, if you will. So
totally. I mean, that's kind of where Dennis's side is coming in, is on the front end of all this side. So I'm kind of up for your thoughts on this one, Dennis.
Yeah, I mean, there's a couple things that here that resonate is so first of all, selfishly internally, cryptanalysis is hard on computers. It takes a lot of CPU power, right? So if I see someone who asks if they should employ, I just had a LinkedIn post about speed bumps, you know, like things that might make the attacker realize he should go somewhere else, he or she should go somewhere else, you know, and have better ROI. Like I always hate to see when there's just no speed bumps in place, you know, that they just have it's wide open, maybe, you know, the proverbial RDP out there with admin, you know, that kind of stuff you hate to see. For me, you know, I always try to, because I've gone more OEM, I try to engage, you know, channel partners whenever I can, the MSPs, you know, like Matt, that are in the trenches. And I try to say, well, let's see how much that key is really worth. Can you give me a differential for what it would cost for you to come back versus getting that one key? Because we're in the ransomware protocol, we actually get to see they're taking counts of how many files on which machine that they're actually sending back. So they know how many files they encrypted sometimes. And we're always like, well, would you want to hack? I'm sorry, would you want to, like, you know, quote unquote hack the protocol, right? You know, and say, hey, they said 30,000, let's say 5 and see if the price goes down, you know, and so stuff like that. But yeah, I mean, the biggest enabler is it has to start far before the ransomware attack happens, you know.
Well, this is what I love about this. This is why getting like all of you together has been fantastic, because we have the entire, this chain here is the entire chain of people you freaking need to make sure that you've got the policy, procedures, controls, communication, education, the system architecture, and I'm looking at people like on the screen, system architecture,
Right.
the oh shit, what happens if, and then and then the individual teams that go, okay, and here's how we deal with it. I mean, this is, dear people who are listening, this is the 4 people you need. Take a flipping hint. So actually, Ron hit a really good point on this one, and I'm gonna hit Ron's point. Then I actually want to come back right to this first one. And this, Curtis, this is kind of aimed at you, which is I like this one. And sorry to put you on the microscope, but it is. Who watches the watchers? And by that I mean, if you are dealing with the adversaries and the criminals, and you know the attackers on a regular basis, how do you guys keep yourselves honest? What internal checks and balances do you have to ensure that the negotiations are done effectively, that you've almost got like an FDIC kind of oversight on what you're doing? Is there anything even in place for that, or is it all still a little kind of wild, wild west out there?
Well, we obviously have our own internal SOPs and SAPs. We have anytime we do a response, there's a 3-person team. There's a lead, a scribe, and a watcher. And our own internal processes are so that everything gets basically monitored, documented, and questioned internally.
Good.
For the customer, when you say watch the watchers, it is the customer. Everything we do is 100% transparent. There's no messages that goes to the threat actors without the customer's full approval, and everything is shared with them real time as it's happening over an encrypted channel. So, and sometimes this doesn't work in our favors. So
Right.
we allow the customer to, you know, ultimately I'm here to make a recommendation and explain to you why you want to do that. If you have a different opinion, you can give that to us and we will execute on it. If we think it's going to materially change the outcome to the negative, we will let you know and we will document that. But ultimately, we're going to say almost whatever you want, with a very few exceptions have we said absolutely not. And those usually involve telling the threat actor to go themselves or something like that.
Yeah, I can only imagine that emotions can run pretty high on this, because I mean, how do you take that? How do you? Because I mean, you want to remove the emotion. Because again, my first attitude, I walk in and find my machine's kind of being. I want to grab a fire axe. I am going to find the perpetrator. I'm taking a fire axe.
This is exactly why you want a third party. One of the many reasons why you want a third party helping you with this. And I can say that, I mean, I love every single customer that I've worked with, but some of them are not in the best emotional state. And they may think that they are, but they are not. And it's hard for them to be objective. Ultimately, you know, the most successful negotiations we've done is when we approach the threat actor with some tactical empathy, see things from their perspective, treat it like a business transaction, very mechanical, very polite, even though, you know, they're the enemy. And yeah, exactly. The customers are it's very difficult for them to do that. And I think Matt wanted to comment on it.
Yeah, totally. Go for it, Matt.
I did. I just wanted to say that I feel like, back to the root and heart of the question that was asked is you're that way and you have a term watcher and you're doing that and it affects margins. And that's a negative thing from an overall business perspective. And you can't make any underhanded deals with the threat actor and take 10 points on the back. And you can't, all those things I'm saying are the same level of care and standard of care that don't even exist in my industry. There's nothing that says I should stand here but this beautiful beard I have. That's it. Right. And ultimately, I think the conversation comes to how do we either self-regulate these type of industries? Is it the right thing to do? How do we make sure that you can do business fairly and help actually fight the plight when others might come in and unscrupulously make that negotiation?
Well, this gets really interesting. So somebody correct me, but the last I checked, and it's been a while, I gotta be honest, the last I checked, the feds basically said thou shalt not pay, and potentially there's opportunities for them to come back on you if you do pay. Is that still at a very high emphasis on the word fuzzy level? At a very high and fuzzy level, is that still the case?
So in our process.
Hang on. So I want to say Del, then Curtis. Yeah, go for it, Del.
Yeah.
I kind of got that impression when Baltimore had their ransomware. I kind of got that impression from Baltimore that they were being told by the feds or somebody in the government not to pay. So I'm not sure, but that just happened I don't even think it was a couple of years ago.
It wasn't, yeah, no. We've had a few, and I got yelled at last year and a couple of times earlier this year. I'm actually dealing with one at the moment. I got yelled at earlier this year, like, oh, you shouldn't be paying. I'm like, well, then you can wave goodbye to some revenue for another company. Curtis, go for it. I want some stuff, and then Dennis.
I have some significant context. I'm going to try to keep it short, but basically, we recommend that every customer who's a victim involves law enforcement, and we will recommend who they involve. And yes, for example, if it's your local FBI field office, they're going to officially tell you not to pay the ransom. However, it is not illegal to pay the ransom unless the person you're paying the ransom to is on the OFAC list. OFAC maintains a list, and so what we do on the front end of any engagement is we check that list. On the back end, once we get the wallet that we're going to pay, we use some crypto analysis tools and blockchain analysis tools to see not only is that wallet affiliated with an OFAC entity, but has it been transacting with in any relative range of an OFAC thing. So the Treasury Department and OFAC have put these memos out to say that you're going to get hit with a civil penalty if you don't, but the net of it is if you show due diligence, you do involve law enforcement, they're going to say no, but they're not going to stop you. And their involvement early in the process is key because it shows that you're acting in good faith, right?
Yeah. The OFAC thing.
Chris, if I could interrupt about the OFAC quickly, and even though it's on the surface might be considered, where I would want the OFAC to happen, right? Because then that helps my product sales or whatever story.
Dennis, do me a favor, explain what OFAC is. That way I can give
it. No problem. So OFAC, actually, Curtis, I think you might be more qualified than I versus my way of describing it. Yeah.
Oh man, so the acronym is lost on me, but it's basically the Department
Office of Foreign Asset Control, I believe.
There we go, Office of Foreign Asset Control.
They're
overseeing which countries we can do transactions with based on terrorist affiliation, things like that. North Korea, Iran are on the list, right? That sort of thing. Yeah.
So I guess my response would be, first of all, whenever we get someone who might be like one of Matt's customers and the business owners, maybe their loans or their credit for their business is tied to their personal assets. At least that's the way it's done in the United States. The world gets very small whenever the guy's looking and he might, the feds are saying don't pay the ransom, but now his house is on the line. His employee, like he knows Bob who lives next door, who's going to lose his job and lose his house because of this. I think that's it's great for the greater good, but then there's a lot of lives that could be destroyed on the way. On the opposite side, from a more technical standpoint, I think the OFAC, the way that the compliance check is great, in that it's great with the big air quotes. Because crypto wallets can be made very quickly. I can make 1,000 in 5 minutes with a little script, right? And so I think the ruling, kind of like the regulations, harken back to a day when you had to walk in with your passport and your ID, and Mark, who's the bank teller, and don't go to that bank account because it's owned by the mob, that kind of stuff. And nowadays, I just think you're gonna, like, Curtis is gonna check that list. Everyone gives a thumbs up, even if it is on the list. Hold on 1 second, hold my beer. I'm going to make a new crypto wallet. Okay, there you go. Now we're compliant, right?
Yes.
The real danger for me is not that. The danger for me is
Well,
that
that just goes back to showing due diligence, but I agree
Yeah.
wholeheartedly, Dennis, about the impact to the small business. The larger companies that we work with are going to be able to recover regardless, but these threats of civil penalties are really short-sighted from a government perspective. I've actually been campaigning and reaching out to folks in Congress and trying to get an audience to create a program for ransomware recovery that there's an ROI. And so
Yeah.
I feel like it's short-sighted. Sorry, go ahead,
So
Chris.
no, you're fine. We're actually doing some stuff within that realm. I can't say too much about it, and there might be some seats coming up soon on that whole discussion.
Okay, great.
So if you look at, there's a project I'm working on behind the scenes to expose a lot more of the architecture on and off chain, and so part of my background is Intel and threat intel and other things. And so we're bringing that into this realm to expose more data behind the chain architecture and various other stuff. So that's being put together, and we're actually doing that with CCTC and a few of the other teams. Okay. So that's all the financial folks, and part of it is because they're very, very concerned with digital assets as a whole, and part of it is obviously for this to start looking at the risks behind it. So there's a lot more coming down the lines aside from like just chain analytics and stuff like that. Some cool stuff we're putting together.
Great.
Yeah. So all right. So actually, this is an interesting one because again, it's somebody just put up there. It's I think Ron put the note up there, which is unfortunately the feds still reserve the right that if somebody ends up on the list, they still reserve the right to come back at you, which is asinine. This whole thing actually reminds me really, really much so of the mess that we've had. I don't want to get into the drug side of the world, the mess we've had around the cannabis side of the world. You've got individual states saying, hey, we're okay with it. You got the feds still saying, no, we're not okay with it. You got everybody in the middle who's like, okay, can we deal with it? Can we not deal with it? Can we sell it? Can we do THC? Can we do CBD? And it's a complete shit show because nobody further up the food chain is willing to put their foot down and say either yes or no completely. And we're running into this, and this problem's not going away, which is a bit frustrating.
I just got a briefing on that yesterday, Chris, from InfraGard about some of those complexities in that space.
Yeah, it's ridiculous. So here's an interesting one, and I'm gonna hit this question because we've talked for 20 minutes or so about the first question, which is necessary. And we've got 15, 20 different bloody points about why you should be paying attention, yet we still have organizations, and Jose put this one out, which is, how can I change my boss's mind? Del, I kind of want to throw this one at you as well to begin with, if you don't mind. So a CFO apparently understood, we can say CFO or board, they understand the risk, they understand the potential, but they still don't want to do anything about it. They don't want to put cyber liability insurance in place. There's all these other things. So I'm really interested in, how do we approach people? How do we approach this? How do we try to package this up and get people to actually listen a bit more effectively? You're on mute again. We lost you on audio.
Sorry, I get in traffic. My traffic out here is loud. But when you're dealing with people, if you're dealing with those C-level execs, you need to build a relationship with them so that you kind of know how they're going to receive information from you, so that you can present it to them in a way that they will understand. And it might take you a few times. It's going to take a few times because their natural thing sometimes is to push back, especially where money is concerned. And so I would say to build that relationship with them, build some kind of trust, and then show them. A lot of people, if you can show them the metrics, or you can show them, some type of numbers or some type of something, they would be more willing to listen to you and to see that it's going to help them.
Yeah, Matt, give me some thoughts on this as well, if you don't mind.
I have a bit more of an operational approach to this, right? In the sense that if they don't want to buy cyber insurance, one of the things that cyber insurance brings, good or bad, is pre-retained components for that incident response, right? Curtis's team is on retainer. He knows that he'll be responding to this faster than he would if someone came in line. He knows, and so the argument should be to that CFO, fine, let me go find those players now, put the $22,000 down on Curtis's retainer, $40,000 down on my attorney, and let's go ahead and do the, wait, that's your insurance premiums were, oh, well then, what, we, like, ultimately, I think there's an operational aspect to have conversations about, okay, when this stuff hits the fan, how long do you want to be down? And while I go research the best person to do this out of duress, and, you know, back to Curtis's earlier point, you know, with the searching. So that'd be my add to that.
It's that ounce of prevention, pound of cure. Is that the way of looking at it? I think it is, isn't it? And I remember years and years ago when we're talking years back now, I remember it was like $1 spent before breach is typically like $9 spent after breach or something like that, because you're paying more. We're all running around like headless chickens. It's more effort and you've got a compressed timeline. That's always an interesting way of looking at it as well. It's like, okay, let's get a roadmap in place and more defensible position on that. Dennis, give me some thoughts on this one, because again, for me, you spent a lot of time before all this lunacy happens, so you've probably got the conversations that.
Yeah, the what we end up seeing is that we kind of present the downtime case. FEMA in the US has some really good numbers. What we've experienced internally is very similar to if there's a major fire on premises for a business, especially on the small to medium business. Of course, the targets of the world, it's a different scenario, right? And then we started approaching it from that angle. And to Dell's point about, you know, speaking the language of the business, it's interesting. Sometimes it's the begrudging IT director buying our product with the CFO being the champion, and sometimes it's the exact opposite, depending on the culture and the emotions involved. So it's really interesting. But the percentage similarity to the major fire kind of scenarios actually was shocking to me. That, you know, but it also gave me something that I could really relate to say, you know, fire extinguishers and suppression systems and things like that, right?
I like that, because again, the biggest problem, one of the biggest problems that we seem to have in this industry, in this world, and it's something we do on the Shit Show on Thursday nights, is Ryan Cloutier says it, which is, you know, we're analog humans in a digital world. We can't tangibly recognize the ransomware, unfortunately, but I know it. My freaking building's on fire. I know exactly what that's going to cost me. So I like that. That's actually a really, really, really cool way of looking at it. That's not bad. Curtis, any thoughts on this one? I mean, you know, you got a CFO who said, hey, I don't want to do anything, and then 2 weeks later, you got a CFO who's now running around like headless chicken.
Yeah, well, I think first I'd like to say that I think everybody recognizes, for the most part, that you should have some sort of incident response plan. I would like to add to that that is not the same. It's not analogous to a ransomware response plan. A ransomware response plan can exist inside an IR plan,
Right.
but there are different elements, and so a lot of times, like for the smaller, less sophisticated organizations, they may say, like, look, I've already got an IR plan, and we're just going to execute that. But what you're going to find is there are fundamental pieces of that that do not address what you're going through from a ransomware perspective. And you know, what Dell was talking about, you know, the measurement of the impact. It is absolutely key. And in fact, I have a little bit of an anecdote. We just closed a negotiation. It was a multi-million-dollar settlement for a very large software company, and we always ask the threat actors for sort of, you know, as part of the deal, we ask them for a lot of things, and sometimes we get it, sometimes we don't. But they were nice enough to give us an attack map of how they got in. But they added a little context, and they said, now hold on, I'm going to look at my screen and quote it. They said, if you use more complex passwords and also did not store passwords and reminders in text files, it wouldn't have happened. That's such a simple thing that cost this company almost $3 million.
Yeah.
It is a super simple thing.
It's every day.
But it's stuff that we've been yelling about for what, 20 years? 30?
Same stuff.
What's DEF CON this year? 20, 26, 27, 20 something or other? Every single year we stand up on stage and we go, look, you bunch of bloody numpties, stop. I ran into it the other day, had an incident. What was their password? 1, 2, 3, 4. I'm like, oh, I'm killing you.
Yeah.
Bastard.
Yeah, so there's a list of basic things that, from a hygiene perspective, that could reduce the chances of ransomware incidents by a significant percentage. And I've stopped hitting myself in the forehead over these things.
Yeah.
Right.
We all have. I mean, let's face it, IBM's putting out lists. You've got Verizon DBIR report on an annual basis. We've all been part of various different lists where people are going, well, you know, if you do OWASP, you can't get, I mean, good grief. How long has that bloody list been out for, and how often has it not changed? And so the data
Matt,
is there.
just also understand that, like, sometimes these businesses feel like they're against some very sophisticated attacker and that they don't have the means to defend themselves, and that's actually not the case. These guys are not sophisticated. They're not using advanced techniques. They're using very basic ones that you can mitigate very easily, and you're ignoring them.
And I think this is it. This comes back to, this comes back to the human, and I'm flabbergasted, and maybe it's because we're in it. I think this is the big part of it. We're in this industry. We've lived it, we breathe it, we see it, we die by it. But that's only a small percentage of any organization. This again comes back to the question, to the conversation with Dell, which is, how do we condense all of this information, all of this knowledge, and try to communicate it effectively? This is it's a rough one. All right, I actually want to hit something different just for a second. I'm going to shut up for a sec. So here's hang on a second. Where was it? Where the hell did the stupid thing go? What stops? So let's just say I get my ass handed to me. I pay the ransom. But let's face it, that data that you took or you encrypted, the chances are you've probably got a copy of the stupid stuff. What stops somebody from still releasing that after I've paid? Are we back to ethics and for, give me the thoughts on this one. I'm up for Matt, you go on this one.
Yeah, I think that they have the need to be able to say, if you pay, I will execute Y. I mean, it brings it back to Curtis's kind of, correlation to it being a business transaction and somewhat colorless and fairly, systemic, if you will. And I think the problem is if they do release that ex post facto of someone doing that deal, the community is tight. Curtis does know about that threat actor and will say, no, you're better off not paying them. They're going to screw you anyway. Right. And I think that what we're getting at is we're starting to understand these threat actors. There are patterns emerging. Granted, there's a lot of idiots. There's a lot of script kiddies and ransomware as a service that comes in, to play quite a bit. And back to the earlier point though, Chris, I don't know that it's always ours to solve. I think some of these manufacturers and people that let you put in 1, 2, 3 star, star, star just shouldn't. We should make it easier for humans to do the right thing and harder for them to do the wrong. It's got to be a 32 character passphrase. Sorry, it's the only way we're gonna let you get in. And if those things started systemically happening, we would have less of this surface area. So anyways, off my soapbox on that.
Yeah, no, so this goes back to DevSecOps. To me, this is a huge DevSecOps kind of plug, to be perfectly honest. It's like, hey, we're all in this shit together. We're going to work together. I mean, that's why, Dell, when you said at the beginning, hey, I'm new in this industry. Oh, hell no, you're not. You have so many years of experience that we need to bring into this industry. Give me some thoughts on this. Dell, if you don't mind, give me some thoughts on this one. And I kind of want to know, again, I want to go back to the human aspect. I want to go, how do we communicate? How do we have the conversations? And how do we bring technology into this conversation effectively on this one?
Just on the people level, I think a lot, and I think this is proven, that a lot of stuff that happens within these companies is from inside. What do you call them? Insider threats. So I think, I mean, a lot of my stuff goes right back to the awareness stuff. Put in those password policies, put in multi-factor authentication, put in some endpoint type protection type things. I'm not so up on the technology of what you would do with those, but I mean, a simple password.
It's all snake oil anyway.
What'd you say, Matt?
It's all snake oil anyway. I'm teasing.
and then have a way to keep reiterating this. I don't know if it's every 3 months you do something with the people in the company, with your clients. And then I wanted to make a comment, and I think it was just something funny that I was sitting there looking at. If these ransomware people are going to use this ransomware as a service, maybe we should have service level agreements. So, if you pay X, Y, Z, pay X, Y, Z.
You joke, but they do send agreements now that are very much, they look like they got it from Rocket Lawyer or something, and the bad guys, and they send it to you. Whereas you do this, we do that. They do that now. Yeah.
Well, because it's a business. I hate to say this. It's a business, and there's reputations involved. This to me goes back to the Silk Road. We've had this shit in our world for the last 3, 4, 5,000 years. This is no different. If I kill you, I can only rob you once. But if I keep coming back every 12, 18, 24 months because your dumbass still doesn't want to learn, you're great. You are a source of income for me. Hey, it's 24 months later. Let's just go and rob them again let's take 10% or let's take 20%. It's a business model. And I stand on my reputation. If I take Dell, I mean, I ransom you and I take your money, or, Curtis, Curtis is the one that's negotiating and we negotiate for X. Well, I'm on my reputation. If I release your data, you're not going to do business with me. Curtis is going to be like, oh God, no, we're screwed. Just don't bother paying these guys because they're assholes. Whereas if I stick to my terms and conditions of business and I destroy I have probably better destruction capabilities than, it's, I mean, Curtis, tell me I'm wrong on this one.
No, I mean, you're right, but I do want to take them into the bad guys and divide them into two categories. Oh, can you guys hear me okay?
Yep.
Yeah, totally. You're good.
Into two categories. So there is the ransomware gangs, let's call them, or organized groups, and that is where the volume of these incidents are coming from. There's also the individual sort of lone wolf actors. The second group is a little more dangerous because they're not building a brand. They don't necessarily have to show up again anywhere. And so we run into those as well. Those are a little bit scarier. But the ransomware groups do kind of have a code of honor. I laugh because, I mean, there's not a lot of honor in what they're doing, but they're trying to build a brand, and they will typically honor what you've agreed to. Now, what we have seen is, like, for example, you're going to get the decryptors. They're going to give you the decryptors 100% of the time. So far, that's been the case. There will be cases where the decryptors cause corruption in the files and it doesn't work. Sorry, those are lost. And then also we have seen where they have exfiltrated data, cherry picked the useful data or the data they think they can monetize on the market later, like PII, HII, and then 6-8 months later, they're showing up in some Russian forum selling those assets to further monetize the breach. So, and that's where we come in. We always recommend that you, after an incident, you're monitoring for this activity for at least 12 months after the breach. That's only happened a handful of times, but it does happen.
Yeah, Ron's interesting. I hate to say it, and then I want Dennis. I need to comment on this. It's an age-old world. It's on the run thieves. Ron was like,
is.
It's on the run thieves.
Curtis, we see that exactly. Actually, was an increase because, of course, we'll also make decryptors for people to improve outcomes, not corrupt files, allow a bunch of different things to happen. And that was the most annoying part for us because we have to figure out, okay, what did this guy do that he's calling encryption? And the gangs, it's very professional. It's using proper encryption algorithms. Our code is nice and pretty, and then in streamline, we can deploy it. And for the most part, it's pretty effective. The part on the lone wolves, that's where we saw a peak in that during COVID, actually during isolation, where all these kind of lone wolves came out, and it was we joked that it was stuff that would make any undergraduate computer science professor cringe. It was just horrible things happening on the encryption world, and we have our warranty on our decryptor, right, to go back and forth a couple times, and it was always we had to I don't know if you guys ever saw Airplane, but where like they spoke jive. It was kind of like you have the Queen's formal English, you have the proper encryption with the ransomware gangs you hear in the news, and then you have this jive, and you got to figure out, and our computer engineers were like, this is horrible code, I never want to see it again. And I'm like, yeah, but we have to replicate the jive, and that was kind of our way of explaining it to clients who saw Airplane. I guess I'm getting a little older, so some of them hadn't seen that anymore, so it's kind of awkward.
Well,
but yeah,
I mean, it's interesting because if you look at it, I mean, if you look at the industry, and I think this is where it gets really interesting, and Dell, this might be something to have a conversation with as well. I still wonder how many people outside our industry realize that this is an absolute industry. It's a multi-billion-dollar industry. And if I am an adversary, maybe I don't want to expose myself to Curtis and his team. Maybe I don't want Matt chasing my sorry ass. Maybe I don't want to run into Dennis. But what I'm actually going to do is I'm going to build my one piece of this model. And this one piece of this model can now be rented out. And maybe it's a Cypher piece of the model. Maybe it's the command and control center part of the model. But I build my part of the model for the business, and I just rent it as a service.
Yep.
And I think I don't think people still fully understand how sophisticated some of this stuff is, how well built some of it is, how well architected it is, and that what's leveled against them is in a lot of cases, you know, a very well-oiled machine. And it's the same thing we deal with the scamming. You know, all the various different scammers coming from all parts of the world, including this country. Yeah, it's an interesting one. All right, so let's have a look. Okay, so a quick question that came in from Al. Any clue about the rules around paying ransomware in Canada? I have no clue on that one. Anybody want to take a stab at that one? Canadian ransomware.
I will plead ignorance and go.
All right. Anybody plead anything other than ignorance?
I can. So
Go for it. You're at it.
So I mean, it's very similar to the United States. The only challenge that we've seen is and something we haven't really talked about much yet is the financial infrastructure for making the payment. Doing that correctly is a little bit complex and has its own operational security component to it. And that one of the main issues we've seen with cross-border stuff, including Canada, is some of those banks will not wire any meaningful amount of money to a crypto brokerage.
Gotcha.
Country or yeah. And so that's been a little bit of something we've had to work around in those cases.
How do you work around it apart from basically carrying a large quantity of currency? I mean, let's just not. I didn't want to go there because my brain's already spinning, going, okay, I'm going to ransomware the company because I know they can't pay, and I'm just going to wait outside the front door and boff somebody on the head, and I'll double down on it. I'm liking this. I can double dip.
Well, I will go into the specifics of the operational security infrastructure because it's somewhat of a trade secret, but ultimately it's an obfuscation tool between the customer's bank and the transaction, not just for the bad guy, but for anybody that wants to trace this stuff for any reason. And so it is an important part of the equation.
You know, I think this is okay. I want to make a comment, and Curtis, please. This isn't any kind of slight against your part of the industry.
Sure.
But it pisses me off that we have failed as an industry so badly that Curtis has to exist.
I actually agree.
Yeah. I mean, it pisses me off. I mean, we've all said it. You know, the fact that I can come in with endpoint software and promise you 100%, the fact that I can come in and say I can protect your data, and I can lie through my teeth that Curtis has to exist. Not only does Curtis have to exist, Curtis has had to build a very sophisticated model to ensure that Curtis can exist. And no matter what Dell does, nobody's listening. And Dennis is, I mean, it's just like, oh, all right. Anyway, we digress.
I have a question for Curtis. Can I ask real quick?
Sure.
When they have to pay the ransom, doesn't most of the clients not know how to do cryptocurrency? So then you have to teach them?
Yeah. So two answers to that. One is those lovely threat actor businesses have done a good job of building a tutorial to tell companies how to do this. But you don't want to follow their instructions because all that's going to do is get your bank locked by the SEC. Don't follow those instructions. But I'm being serious.
No.
But yes, so part of our job is helping the customer understand how to pay the ransom and helping facilitate that for them. Yeah.
How many times have you educated about cryptocurrencies? Sorry, Chris, I didn't see you start to speak, but how often are you educating the client about what even a cryptocurrency is and what that transaction looks like, if you will?
Yeah, I mean, the smaller businesses, certainly that's part of the conversation. But they've all heard of Bitcoin and the blockchain. They've heard those words, they just don't know what they mean. And they don't really have to. We just, we'll give them the step-by-step instructions on what to do, and they do it. Yeah.
So, okay, I actually want to let's step back to the original scenario that we started, which is I walk in, I power my computer on, and it basically tells me to go pound sand. If I have followed Dell's conversations, which is I grab my incident response plan, I get my leadership together, I grab my ransomware plan, how the heck do I know how to find you? I'm sure I'm not going to go out there and Google 1-800, find me somewhere to negotiate my ransomware. I don't have Yellow Pages, and probably most of my computers are locked out at the moment. How do people build these things effectively? I mean, how do we know that we're
external counsel, so an attorney that specializes in breach response, or your cyber insurance company are the two best places to go. Because and there's other companies besides me that do this, and they'll have a list of those companies and they'll make recommendations, and that's the best way to do it.
You're here and we're talking to you, which is what I like. Matt, I'm assuming something similar on those conversations.
Well, usually my clients are already my client. And so for us, what we're doing is actually doing the first parts of the IR and just seeing, do I have culpability? Like, if I'm honest, I mean, that's at least the first step in my life. But once that then occurs, it's about saying, okay, client, how do we want to proceed? I can't reboot your server. I can't restore. We might need to gather artifacts. And depending on which path you go, I might not even be the commander in charge any longer. And so, we like to just educate, similar to Curtis. I have a path through Leo that we follow. We like to control that path, similar, just because of the different expectation rates, depending on how you do it. And then I'll usually engage Curtis vis-a the attorney or vis-a-vis the insurer. And so I am typically a guide in that space. And then usually I'm going to take second command pretty quickly in those engagements. So
Dennis, similar question from your standpoint. Give me some thoughts on this, please. How the heck do we reduce this and do this better?
Yeah, I mean, that's a great question. So by the time they get to me, they've already kind of been hit. We haven't had, we're installing the prevention right away now, because the hacker, the attackers, the criminals were actually turning off our decryptors because they were using ours, not theirs, things like that. So they were still, in America, some people say something like the Indian territory, back to the old Westerns, And so it seems like, if they don't already have someone trusted, if they approach us and, as the lone wolf victim, and they haven't spoken to an attorney yet, and they haven't spoken to their insurance, we have to start kind of bridging that gap right away to say, why haven't you? Before we do anything, let's go find someone, and then we kind of help them versus them just kind of running in unprepared, a little bit lost, and hoping that there's some kind of technology they can pay $20 for and to get them out of the jam, which is unfortunately not the case, right? So, but we do see where, by the time they're contacting folks like Curtis and calling their MSP or the MSSP, what we're seeing is either the ransomware is still there, but we're going to be decrypting it, so they're going to be calling Curtis again, whenever someone clicks to Dell's point, despite the training, or we find, more little more troublesome is that the attackers never actually left. They're just kind of hanging around and hiding out, and they're moving around. And our tool will say, hey, someone's there. It's not ransomware, but someone's there, and they're just kind of chilling and drinking a Mai Tai. What's going on here? So we see both situations, and that definitely puts a lot of risk on people, even after. To Chris' point about the business rules, like they're going to come back in a year or whatever. I'm just wondering if they're just kind of biding their time until, revenues are back, and then hitting them again.
Yeah, go for it, Dell.
Another thought I'd like to add, and this is just something that I recently learned, is that these companies and these people, and I guess this has something that they've been trying to put together, that we should be working collectively as companies, as cyber professionals. Everybody should be working collectively to try to keep this stuff out. So if you have some kind of incident response plan or whatever that's in place, you should be sharing that information across platforms and across different companies and stuff like that, so that people know what's going on. So, I mean, this collaboration needs to be happening so that we can stop this, kind of get it under control.
Or at least try and make a bit of a dent in it. That to me is the big one. Go for it, Matt. You're bouncing
I need
down.
a recording of this. My entire job is an outward-facing sharing of cybersecurity practices across the industry. So I need to take this to my CEO to reinforce those salary conditions we talked about.
Here's the other part of it, and I mean, Curtis has probably got a bunch of this, and I know that when we get dragged into incidents, the first thing, unfortunately, that people want to do is go, shh, do we have to say anything about it? Yeah. I'm like, yeah, actually, you need to go to the top of your building and yell to every single one of your neighbors, I got hit, here's how it happened, here's what I learned about it, here's what you need to do about it, right now.
I'm with you, Matt.
Not in 6 months' time, because by the way, in 6 months' time, being the lazy attacker that I am, I'm going to hit everybody else around you.
Yeah.
I think that's.
A to B to C.
I wish we had some of that. Yeah, it's a bit frustrating on that one. All right, so we got 10 minutes left. I'm trying to actually, okay, I got a tech question, and I'm actually interested in everybody's opinion on this one. There's a question that came in from Jose, which was, should I use my browser to save critical account passwords? I want everybody's, Dennis, you're up first on this one. Can I use my browser to save my critical passwords? And then I'm going to ask everybody else.
So there are common functions out there on the offense side to decrypt browser passwords from, say, Chrome and Firefox or things like that for they call it post exploitation kind of activities, right? Having said that, it almost seems to me to be a business decision, because I've seen the opposite side where someone says, we will not store any passwords inside of the browser, right? Because they talked to someone who's a pen tester, and then they drank the Kool-Aid, right? They figured it out, and then the support costs go through the roof because nobody ever knows what the bloody password is for all these systems, and then they end up losing one and they can't get back in the system, and they're hoping that I've even been approached by someone who says, can you exploit our server so that we can get back in, which of course raises a lot of flags, so it's always a double-edged sword. But yes, they can get passwords from the browsers.
Yeah, there we go. That's a good way of putting it. They can be, so again, it's a risk thing. Matt, you're up.
Oh my gosh, yeah, I threw up in my mouth a little, as someone said in the conversation earlier, but no storing in the browser, because there are so many methods to attack that. But in the same breath, if you find a password manager extensibility that has great single sign-on, or potentially has great protections that allow you to set some controls, and then that password is also in a zero trust model where it's encrypted for them, but also encrypted and I have the last key, meaning they cannot be forced to disencrypt those passwords from a legal and or opportunistic perspective usually. And so like for us, we have 2 different password managers for our company. For the executives, we have one that is a little bit harder to use and a little more secure, and for the other, we have a little bit less. But the point is not to be missed that it's all about managing the passwords, where you can't just manage the identity, right? Because IAM is one of those core answers. But if not, you do have these trashy passwords. They should be managed, just not in your browser extension. It should be in some type of third-party system that you can control, design, or otherwise.
Got it. Dell, and then Curtis, I'll hit you up on this one. Go for it, Dell. Give me your thoughts, please.
From that people perspective, people are going to do it. And if you're going to have these long passwords and you don't have this knowledge like what we have, then by all means put them somewhere. Don't just use 1, 2, 3, just don't use that. So I mean, when you're looking at it and you're looking at, your grandma, or whoever, just they're not going to know to get these different levels of password managers. But I would say no, don't store it in your browser.
Cool. Curtis, give me some thoughts on this one. You've seen it all as well.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. Don't store them in the browser. I'm a big fan of password managers that have the capabilities that Matt was describing. You have to give them an alternative. You're telling them they can't write it down, it can't be simple, and you can't store it someplace. I mean, so you have to give them something. Is it 100% foolproof? No, but password managers are, in my opinion, the way to go. The other issue that didn't get illustrated when we were talking about the technical challenges of storing in the browser is things like non-repudiation, which people walking away from their machine, and then somebody sits down, they can log into whatever that person, without any kind of additional authentication. That's an issue as well. So there's a number of reasons why you should not store them in your browser.
Yeah, I think there's, I'll put a slightly different hat on. There's a couple of companies I hang out with where we're doing a lot for identity and passwords and things like that to make it much more effective. Guys over at Etherpass, guys over at TruSona are 2 teams that I work with pretty closely. So it's nice to see what both of those are doing to bring a little bit more clarity, ease of use, tight on identity, all that kind of good stuff. So as more and more of that comes out, I think it's going to be useful, because again, we've all got lists of the darn things, and how do we manage them? How do we effectively, because you can't tell people no. To everybody's point here, we have to give people an alternative, and it has to be usable. Yes. Otherwise, we all end up, going back to whatever. All right, we are running up against the top of the hour. We've got a bunch of good questions. Actually, one technical question that I want to throw at people. Dennis, I'll let you hit this one first if you don't mind, please. So typically, I walk in and I turn my computer on and I see the ransomware screen. Is it at that point too late for me to do anything to try to initial? Is somebody still working behind the scenes to encrypt more and more of my damn crap? Or by the time that screen comes up, it's game over and I might as well go make a cup of tea and basically give Curtis a call?
That's a really, really great question. So what we've seen in the tradecraft for the tools, two things. The first is that they will reach out to network shares before they will encrypt the local machine. So by the time someone says that there's something going on with local machine, they have already traversed every single place, yes. So if you have 10 machines, it's actually on Curtis's world, you have a challenge of having like 10 machines generating encryption keys, and you're trying to figure out which key encrypted that file on which server, right? So by the time it hits your desktop and that changes, you're done. Now, in some cases, the ransomware will be done and then die. It'll say, okay, I'm shutting down, right? Other times, it kind of sits there alive still, waiting for new file servers to pop up. So we have seen where, admins will stand up a new server and the ransomware says, oh, look, something new, and I've already elevated the system, so I have access to every possible share that the computer can see, and it will go ahead and happily encrypt. Now, by then, you're going to be shutting things off to your point about remediating. Every time you shut off a ransomware process or a thread, program, it actually will normally corrupt all the files that you're passing around trying to encrypt them, right? So what you can sometimes have is a scorched earth methodology where every time you shut down the process and it comes back to life, 500 files are now corrupted, and now you have to pay a whole bunch of money to try to get it back. That's been the biggest concern that I've seen with this kind of, I think, with ransomware IR versus IR, right? That's the biggest thing we see. And I'll stop talking now. I can go on.
No, that's huge. I love that question that came in. I took it and I answered it, and I forgot to say kudos to whoever it was that put it out there. All right, we are hitting the top of the hour. I would love to give each of you kind of like final minute just to wrap up, have some more thoughts and questions to everybody that's listening. So I'm going to shut up and I'm going to, Dell, if you wouldn't mind, please kick us off, ladies first.
Pay or not to pay, it's up to your company, it's up to your business, but always go back to the human factor and start there and see if you can get some answers before you actually get hit. That's the best way to deal with ransomware, I think, in my opinion.
So hit it before it hits, basically. Get the business sorted out. Let's look at policies, procedures, controls, awareness training. Basically, be prepared.
Be prepared for it. I mean, it's going to happen. So the best thing you can do is be prepared.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. This is kind of like a shout out for some of the stuff we've done in the past on like threat intel and also deception. Hate to say it, I'll throw like a pin in for that, which is, start putting a minefield inside your freaking environments, and then maybe somebody will trip over one before everything gets their ass handed to it. Awesome, thank you, Dell. Dennis, sir, I'm going to hit you next because typically, like, you're next in the chain, and then we're going to hit Matt, and then we'll hit Curtis.
The windows are arranged. So actually the biggest value that I see our products and our services giving the victims or people that might one day be a victim is time. It is the least sexy of all of the sales pitches, but essentially moving it from having 3 admins who are running out of the IT building on campus, trying to get over to that part of the hospital where the ransomware is running to, pull plugs and do whatever they have to do. If anything you can do to prevent that, and to have a coordinated, measured response, maybe that Dell and her folks have, prepared beforehand for that plan. That seems to be the biggest value we provide. It's not even technical. It's just, hey, can we have time so we're not up at 3 a.m. trying to catch a flight to Wisconsin because that's where the server is right now and everyone's work from home, right?
Yeah. No, that's appreciated. Matt, sir, you're up.
Pay or don't pay. I think the conversation actually is you are paying, and the reason we're in this industry is because people aren't paying it. And what I'm getting at by that is you're either going to pay the ransomware or you're going to pay the work up front in order to fix it and have the policies and have buy-in and have hearts and minds and stop that one executive that blows it up and says, I don't want to do that. And then the other alternative is you don't pay the ransomware. You're still paying it. You're going to lose business, reputation, cost, downtime, all of these things. And so all I'm saying is don't lie to yourself. You're paying it. Let's pay it up front and have a control of how we do this.
That's a really, I like that way of looking at it. It's like, look, you're going to have an outlay. Where do you want to spend it?
Yeah.
And actually, you know what? It's a really interesting one. And again, you know, I hate to say it, from Curtis's standpoint, if we hand him and his team some money, we're still going to have to pay even more to put all the shit right that they managed to get in the first place. Yeah. So you're double downing at that point in time. Yeah, that's all more potentially. Okay, I like that one. Thanks. Curtis, sir, you get to close us out on this one.
Well, it's hard to go after Matt, your energy level and that fantastic beard, man. I'll just dovetail off of that and say that, you know, yes, I do feel like the government has a role to play here in helping curb this, other than, you know, levying fines against the victims. I'm sure I'm making enemies, but I do think they have a role here. But ultimately, the responsibility does fall on the organization. And like I said, there is a very small list of things that every company can do that don't cost much money. They're not terribly complicated, that will drastically reduce the likelihood of a successful ransomware attack. So that responsibility is on the business. And I guess, you know, the responsibility for us as you know, panelists and specialists in the industry is how do we communicate that list to people? You know, I can certainly get an article written in CSO magazine or something like that, but you know, the small to medium business that Matt's working with is not reading that. They're not reading it. Yeah. So how do I get that message to them, right?
Yeah, well, it's the same thing to Dell's point. That's just some of the one on here. The CFO's not necessarily reading it. The board definitely isn't reading it. Not all the tech people are reading it. I mean, that's, yeah, that is the huge part. It is under communication and awareness. We've got to do a much better job of that. Well, it's part of the reason we're doing this. And I have a huge appreciation and thank you very much for everybody joining here today. I'm ridiculous for you spending
right at the end.
So.
Right at the end. Thank you for having me. I appreciate being here.
Thank you. Likewise. Love getting to see the perspectives of other peers that I don't like to have to meet with sometimes. So nice to meet you, Dell and Curtis and Dennis. And
yeah,
I think we'll end it. Chris said to take over if he went dead.
Know.
You dropped right at the end.
Yeah, totally agree. Thanks.
Right. Thank you.